I used that as an excuse to keep my distance. Once that question was answered, there was no place to hide. What's that supposed to mean? Who was I kidding? I knew what it meant. Barry and Lenny hadn't written together since the whole thing started. They'd been friends for years, just as Lenny and I had been. Now their friendship was suffering. No one knew where they stood. This was a mess of my creation. I could think of no comfort to offer. When he took me home, saying goodnight was even weirder than before. He'd gotten a clean bill of health, but the cure proved more deadly than the disease. There would be severe consequences for all of us, no matter how I proceeded. We'd entered dangerous waters, and there was no way we were all coming out unscathed. Someone was going to sink. In a way, we all would. I knew that. But selfish me pressed on. I wanted to be kissed, to know. Barry took his time, seeming to ponder the potential. Thinking that at last he was weakening, I parted my lips in anticipation. I prayed he'd slam his body against mine, against the wall, and lay one on me, but it was not to be our fate. Not that night. Forever the master of control, he waved and was off. The next morning I was awakened by the ringing telephone. Remember me? Lenny. He was back, just in the nick of time. I'm opening for Jake Richards tonight. Want to come? Not nearly as famous as he was soon to become, Jake was already a big deal. Not long before, mutual friends had introduced me to him at a street fair. I was tongue-tied and lame. He virtually ignored me. A huge fan of his for years, I never missed him on Johnny or Dave. It was exciting to get a chance to meet him in a better context. More than that, I couldn't wait to see Lenny. There was only one dressing room backstage at Kennedy's, and normally both acts shared it. But Jake was arguably the most respected stand-up of the day. In reverence, we hung at the bar. Just before the set, Lenny wandered back there for a moment, first escorting me to a table. And I noticed as Lenny took the stage, Jake wandered out and watched a good portion of Lenny's set, laughing appreciatively. It made me like him even more. Lenny joined me at the table for Jake's set. The combination of seeing him perform live and Len's connection to him heightened the experience. I laughed so hard, I cried. Still high from the rush following his set, Jake joined Lenny and me for a few minutes. He was staring at me, and I was quite flattered. It wasn't until a later trip to the restroom that I realized the cause. I played Millie Forbush in a high school production of South Pacific. They built a straw shower for I'm going to wash that man right out of my hair. Trying to be authentic, they had running water so that I could really wash my hair on stage. But it wasn't quite working right in the dress rehearsals. It wasn't until opening night that I did it for the first time. Gales of laughter followed me out of the shower through the rest of the number, and my confidence soared. It wasn't until I got backstage and began changing for the next scene that I noticed the black sludge pouring down my face. I discovered waterproof mascara for the duration of the run, but had neglected to wear it that night at Kennedy's. Who knew? I guess Lenny didn't want to embarrass me, but shit, to Jake, I will forever be the lame-o. After fixing my face, Lenny and I had another drink. He had me laughing in no time. Sharing a joint on the car ride home, as we neared my building, the what happens now panic began to set in. Lenny dutifully double-parked. Not without forethought, he made sure we were out of view of my doorman. Signal number one. He planned to kiss me, and so he did. Just as I was beginning to get lost in his kiss, I remembered our unfortunate last encounter and the fact that I was still not in the clear. It kind of put a damper on things, but not for long. Lenny kissed me with such passion. It came from a place so deep, my negative thoughts were completely dissipated. Signal number two, he had more in mind. Basically speechless at this point, I indicated for him to park. Straightening up, I headed straight for the door. I gave Carlos a little wave as he and Lenny exchanged a few baseball scores. I continued walking, each step marked and deliberate, taking my time, allowing Lenny to catch up. Just as the elevator door opened, he placed his hands on my waist, guiding me inside while nibbling the back of my neck. There's something so damn sexy about being kissed from behind, unable to see one's seducer. It didn't take long for my fantasy of being slammed against the wall to come to fruition. Lenny spun me around and kissed me so fiercely my head clunked loudly against the back of the elevator. Startled, he pulled back apologetically. I laughed, and then so did he, as I yanked him back to me. As the door opened, we spilled out, falling on the floor. Laughing like idiots, we struggled to get up. As I fumbled for my keys, Lenny's hands were slowly searching my body again from behind. He soon found what he was seeking. As he attempted to cut my breast, I wiggled away, embarrassed at the prospect of being eyed via peephole by Valerie, my nosy neighbor. As we got inside, kissing, undressing, and banging into everything in our path, we weren't graceful, but it sure was fun. Steps before reaching my bed, tangled in our partially removed clothing, we fell yet again. Our relationship really required mats. I took no time for music or candles. We'd had all the romance we'd needed, years' worth. I didn't have to remind Lenny to be careful. Don't worry, Andy. I purchased top-of-the-line protection, guaranteed not to break or they take the kid. Just as he had been slow and methodical, taking his time to romance me, so was he in his seduction. We made love for hours, until just before daybreak. Exhausted, barely able to move, I didn't put up a fight when he began getting dressed. Sitting on the edge of the bed, as he put on his shoes, he turned back to face me. His eyes searched mine, like a puppy needing affirmation. I smiled. Normally, I would have been wounded beyond repair if a man left my bed before morning. But I knew Lenny would be back. This was more than sex. This was the beginning of love. I was deep in REM sleep when the phone rang about an hour later, the sun now shining through the still opened blinds. As I rose to close them, I felt a trickle between my legs. Lenny's voice was stifling his excitement. I figured it was the aftermath of our passion until he started laughing. What? What's so funny? We'd had fun, but it wasn't funny. I mean, well, parts of it were, but Lenny, trying to control his laughter, actually had to take a moment to compose himself to speak. You know, when I left Andy, it was dark. I just kind of got dressed and split. He paused. Yeah, and? I said, wanting to get back to sleep. Well, I didn't think much of it at the time. And? I repeated impatiently. When I said goodnight to Carlos, he smiled, and then he did a sort of double take. He looked at me in what I could only describe as horror. Horror? I was so distracted by you that I didn't give it much thought. As I got into my car, I was stopped at the light. I noticed a cabbie next to me. He looked over and nodded casually. Then he did a double take. He looked at me with that same startled expression. You're kidding. Why? Did you forget to put your shirt on or something? I was trying to figure out where he was going with this. Not exactly. By this time, I was curious, so I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. The sun was just beginning to come up, and I noticed my face was covered. Your face was covered in what? I demanded. Blood. Blood? With that, I threw the light on, and there was blood everywhere. On the sheets, on the pillow, on the floor. Holy shit! Oh my God, I was horrified. And relieved. No unwanted pregnancy, but what a way to find out. Anyone else, and I would have been mortified, beyond repair, and I would have joined a nunnery. But it was Lynn, sweet Lenny. And I figured any man that was going to have enough blood all over his face to be seen by a cab driver in another vehicle in the dark, I'm thinking, that man, he's a keeper.